Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world muffled by cotton gauze and half-held sneezes, where every cough drew a stare and every sewing circle could save a life. You're in San Francisco in the fall of 1918. Fog rolls thick off the Pacific, curling between the buildings like a stray cat looking for warmth. Street lamps glow dimly behind the mist. The city, already spooked by wartime rationing and telegrams from Europe, is about to be visited by something else entirely. Something quieter, deadlier, and far more invisible than the German army. You're walking down Market Street now. It's strangely quiet for a weekday. The usual clang of the cable car seems muffled, as if even the steel has a sore throat. There's a chill in the air, and not just the usual damp kind that clings to your coat and nose. This one carries a hum of tension, like something is lurking just out of sight. A man across the street pulls a handkerchief from his pocket and coughs into it. 3 quick barks, sharp and dry. He folds the cloth with one hand, eyes darting to make sure no one saw. He fails. A newsboy hollers, but his voice cracks like a dropped plate. You don't quite catch the headline. It's something about Kansas, soldiers sick, a camp called Funston. The words vanish into the breeze before you can make sense of them. You step around a puddle and pause at the corner, where a woman in a wide-brimmed hat adjusts her scarf until it covers her entire face, except for her eyes. You'd think she was trying to rob a stagecoach if you didn't know better. You probably won't survive this if we're being honest. Not without 6 layers of gauze, a pocket full of camphor, and some old-fashioned luck. But don't worry, you're just here to listen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I like to imagine the whole world dozing off together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sidewalk under your shoes feels damp, but not freshly rained on. It's the kind of urban moisture that just exists in San Francisco. Persistent, clingy, possibly intelligent. You pass a grocer's window, the display of apples oddly untouched. Fruit prices are going up, not because of the flu, technically. The war, they say, always the war. You reach for your handkerchief and remember, you left it at home. A small moment of panic blooms in your chest, totally disproportionate, but you check your coat pocket anyway. Just lint, useless against pathogens. At the next corner, a city notice board displays something new. Wear a mask and save a life. In all caps, black paint, no fuss. Beneath it, someone scrawled, "Or don't, your funeral." Classic San Francisco sass. Historians still argue whether San Francisco was the first U.S. city to mandate public mask use, but one thing's certain. They were enthusiastic. The Red Cross had been handing out homemade face coverings like Halloween candy, some made of cheesecloth, some, weirdly, of lace. The idea was simple. If your spit can't get out, the virus can't ride it. But that wasn't quite how viruses worked. Not that anyone knew. Not yet. A man in a bowler hat rushes past you. He's wearing what looks like part of a curtain tied around his head. He bumps your shoulder, mumbles something, and vanishes into the fog. You can't help but notice the little triangle of red poking out from under his makeshift mask. Lipstick, maybe. Or blood. Best not to guess. Just then, a streetcar creaks into view. Is barely a third full. You step on board, greeted by the smell of metal, damp wool, and the faint tang of anxiety. Across from you, two women sit, whispering into gloved hands. One of them clutches a small roll of white gauze like a worry doll. You catch only fragments. Army base. No beds left. Fever by morning. You're not sure if they're exaggerating or if you're behind the curve. The conductor pulls his hat lower over his brow and taps the glass sign above him. It reads, "Masks required, no exceptions." Below it, a hand-lettered note. We really mean it this time. It was just a few months ago that the Spanish flu, though it didn't originate in Spain, first raised its ugly head. The first confirmed U.S. case had been in March at Camp Funston, Kansas. A single soldier woke up with a sore throat and a fever. Within a week, hundreds were sick. But that was the Army's problem, people figured. Far away, contained. Except it wasn't. You glance down and notice a pair of knitted gloves on the seat beside you. Someone left them behind. They're fraying at the cuffs, a loose thread dancing in time with the motion of the car. The woman across from you is still whispering. Back on the street, a man is standing on a crate, waving a pamphlet and shouting about mustard baths and mercury. He calls himself Dr. Frank, but his tie is stained and his shoes don't match. Still, a small crowd has gathered. People will listen to anyone who offers a cure, even if it smells like soup and burns your nose hairs. Someone nearby sneezes. Everyone flinches. Then, as if by some unspoken agreement, the crowd begins to disperse. Slowly, calmly, no fuss. Just a little shuffle back into the fog. You walk the final few blocks home in silence. The air feels heavier now, like the fog has weight, like it knows something you don't. A cat meows from a windowsill, masked only by its whiskers. The flu isn't just an illness, it's a mood, a presence, a pressure, and tonight it's just starting to settle in. You wake up to the sound of church bells, 4 slow, deliberate rings. Not the usual Sunday chimes. These are different, measured, muffled. You lie in bed a moment longer, tucked under a quilt that smells faintly of cedar and starch. A draft snakes in from the window pane, but you don't bother getting up to close it. Fresh air, after all, is supposed to help. That's what everyone says now. Open windows, sunshine. Ventilation is the new holy water. Downstairs, the radio murmurs a fuzzy voice mid-broadcast. Something about troop trains and elevated case numbers. The volume cuts in and out. Caught between static and fate, you know better than to trust it entirely. Official reports have been slippery at best. The word epidemic dances around the headlines like it's afraid of commitment. By the time you're dressed and on the street, the city's anxiety has multiplied. You pass a corner bakery with a chalkboard outside. Hot bread. No coffers. There's a red X on the door. Not quite a warning. Not quite a promise. At the newspaper stand, the front page reads, "Flu hits Camp Dodge, Army base overrun." You scan the subheadings. 100 sick, dozens dead, and no one sure how it started. Most agree it's moving with the troops, hitchhiking from barracks to battlefield to bedroom. But others point fingers at ships, or trains, or depending who you ask, immigrants, birds, or cosmic dust. Scientific consensus is more of a gentle shrug at this point. You hear a cough behind you and instinctively step aside. It It's not even a strong cough, more of a tired throat clearing. Still, it slices the air like a razor. Everyone reacts. People glance. A man touches his gauze mask and adjusts it a little tighter, as if that will keep the virus out. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. Historians still argue whether those early masks helped at all, or if they just made people feel like they had control over something utterly wild. You duck into the pharmacy on the corner. It smells like soap, chalk, and desperation. Shelves that once held cold remedies and aspirin are picked bare. Only camphor cubes remain, stacked like sad sugar lumps. A handwritten sign dangles from a shelf. No quinine, no iodine, no asking. The pharmacist behind the counter is wearing gloves and what appears to be a modified napkin over his face. He offers you a curt nod, then returns to stirring something in a blue glass bottle. The label reads, "Tincture of Hope," probably just water and alcohol. A teenage girl is buying licorice and turpentine. Whether for her father's lungs or for her nerves, you can't tell. Back outside, the rumors run thicker than the fog. At the barber shop, men talk about the outbreak like it's a sports team. "It's slowing down in Boston," says one, "but they're dropping fast in Chicago." No one mentions how quickly it's arrived here, just days after news from the East. At the public library, a volunteer hands out flyers titled, "How to Spot the Flu, Early Warnings, Fatigue, Fever, a Sore Throat." The list ends with a chilling line. If your ears ring or your skin flushes bright red, seek help, but don't expect it quickly. There simply aren't enough nurses, or beds, or coffins. You head toward the post office. There's already a line of people 6 deep, all spaced apart like they're standing on invisible lily pads. Everyone wears something over their face. Not all of it qualifies as a mask. One woman has a baby blanket pinned across her nose. A man is using what looks like a sanitary napkin. A boy wears a makeshift hood of stitched together sock ends. Resourceful, if not exactly sterile. Someone in the queue mutters, "It's just like the plague, isn't it?" Another replies, "At least rats had the decency to be visible." You finally reach the counter and hand over a letter. The clerk sprays it with something that smells like vinegar before placing it in the outbox. He catches your puzzled look and shrugs. "Just in case," he says, "I heard the Spanish dip all their mail in olive oil." The Spanish, you note, seem to be blamed for everything lately. But the truth? Spain only got the nickname because it was neutral during the war and had no press censorship. When Spanish papers reported flu outbreaks, people assumed it had started there. Meanwhile, U.S. and British military censors were keeping their lips stitched tight, not wanting to spook morale. So Spain got the credit unfairly, and the name stuck. You cross the street, nearly slipping on wet leaves. At a park bench sits an old man, carving birds into the wood with a penknife. He is not wearing a mask, just a long scarf, wrapped tight. You ask him if he's worried. He chuckles. "Son, I made it through 2 divorces and 1 fire. If the flu wants me, it better bring a lunch." A little further on, a public poster has gone up on the brick wall near the butcher shop. Bold letters again, "Cover up or shut up," and smaller text beneath, "Gauze, scarf, or shirt tail. We don't care, just cover your mouth." You pass a child hopscotching along the sidewalk, chanting under her breath, 1 cough, 2 sneeze, mama goes to bed, 3 wheeze, 4 shake, papa might be dead. Cheerful, Back home you boil water for tea. Ginger, mostly, not because it works, but because it feels warm in your hands. Outside, the street has grown eerily quiet again, like the city is holding its breath. You settle in near the window, watching the fog roll in again. Same as yesterday, same as tomorrow, but something's different now. The first rumors aren't rumors anymore. The flu is here. And it's not just a cough or a chill, it's a question mark, stitched across every face you pass, hidden under cotton and lace. You step outside the next morning into a city that has begun to look like a hospital ward with steeples. Everyone's covered in white or gray or brown fabric, from tightly tied muslin masks to pillowcases turned balaclavas. The air is colder now, and somewhere a wind chime taps nervously in the distance, like a ticking clock. Today, you've agreed to meet your neighbor Helen at the schoolhouse. Not for classes, of course. Those were suspended 2 weeks ago. Now the classrooms host sewing circles, first aid lessons, and a freshly improvised mask knitting club. Yes, masks, not surgical ones, not factory standard gauze. These are softer, looser, homespun affairs, knitted with care by people who've never met a virus, but want very much to be useful. There's something oddly comforting about it. In a world spiraling with uncertainty, pulling wool through loops feels orderly, productive. If not medically sound, at least emotionally so. As you walk down Main Street, signs of this mask movement are everywhere. In one storefront window, there's a hand-painted sign that says, "Join the front line with yarn." Underneath, a poster shows a cartoon grandmother wielding knitting needles like swords. Inside the schoolhouse, the usual din of children is replaced by the rhythmic click of needles. Women sit in rows, bundled in coats despite the wood stove puffing away in the corner. Bolts of yarn in muted earth tones cover the tables. Nobody's making anything fashionable here. These masks aren't meant for parties. They're meant for breath, or the illusion of safe breath. Helen waves you over and pushes a skein of something blue into your hands. "Wool's warm," she says, "but it itches like hell. That's how you know it's working." You sit beside her, feeling clumsy with the needles. Your fingers aren't built for this, but then again, neither is your heart built for watching people die in hallways because there weren't enough masks. The teacher, now repurposed as mask supervisor, walks the rows, nodding approvingly at each project. "Keep your stitches even," she says gently, "or you'll breathe through the holes." Of course, there's no real data on whether these knitted masks do much at all. Historians still argue whether they offered any real protection, or if they were simply a morale booster, like war bonds or victory gardens. A tidy way to say, we're doing something, and something, when death is invisible, feels like a shield. Across the room, a group of boys is repurposing cheesecloth into bandana-style covers. They're turning it into a game. Who can tie it the fastest with one hand? Their laughter is thin, brittle. Even play feels like a performance now. In the back corner, a young girl is stitching poems into the borders of her masks. You wander closer to read one. It says, "Breathe not deep when strangers pass, or death may ride upon the gas." It's clever, if a little grim. Helen sees you reading and leans in. "Her father was a poet," she says. "Died last week. She won't talk about it, but she writes." By noon your fingers are sore, your yarn is tangled, and your first attempt looks more like a sock for a chicken than a face covering. Still, no one laughs. Helen pats your arm. Better than nothing, she says. That seems to be the motto of 1918. The radio in the corner crackles to life. A woman's voice, calm, measured, reads a list of newly appointed rules for public conduct. You hear snippets between static. Avoid all unnecessary gatherings. Masks to be worn at all times. No spitting in public. The last rule elicits a few chuckles. Spitting had been a grand American pastime until now. Spittoons were everywhere, and tobacco-chewing men regarded sidewalks as personal dumping grounds. But now, spit was practically weaponized. You finish your second attempt at a mask. It's a bit better. You try it on, too tight. Your breath fogs up your glasses. Helen offers to trade. Hers is too loose anyway. It feels oddly intimate, sharing yarn scraps like this, like you're passing around little swatches of survival. The conversation turns to rumors again. One woman heard from her cousin in Philadelphia that entire families are being buried together. Another says San Francisco is fining people $5 if they are caught without masks. You mentally calculate what $5 means in your world. About a week's food, a month of coal, too much. Someone asks whether the flu will go away once winter ends. Another voice pipes up, "My uncle says it's just like the 1889 outbreak, cleared up by Easter." But even that memory feels shaky. The truth is, no one knows. Even the doctors can't agree. Some say it's bacterial. Others swear it's viral, though no one's seen a virus under a microscope yet. It's like guessing the shape of a shadow. Outside, the bell tower rings again. Another 4 chimes. A local code of sorts. Some say it means another death. Some say it means another quarantine order. Still others insist it's just the noon bell, delayed by grief. You pack up your unfinished mask, roll it into a tidy ball, and slip it into your coat pocket. Helen walks with you to the edge of the schoolyard. The wind has picked up, rattling dead leaves across the sidewalk like dry laughter. As you part ways, she says, "See you tomorrow. We're trying out silk thread next. Might be better at catching the flu vapors, or whatever they're calling them this week." You nod, but your eyes wander to the pale gray sky. Silk masks, wool masks, cheesecloth masks. None of them feel like armor, but they do feel like defiance. Because if you can't stop the flu, at least you can stitch your fear into something vaguely useful. You wake up the next morning with your mask beside your bed like a dream catcher made of wool and worry. Breakfast is quiet. Even the toast crunches softly, as though it knows not to disturb the stillness that's settled in over everything. The paper boy leaves the news on your porch and practically sprints away, his own mask sagging beneath his chin. You wonder how long he'll stay healthy. The headline today reads, "Flu cases rise. Red Cross calls for more masks." You read it slowly, spooning lukewarm oatmeal into your mouth while the words soak in. Below the headline is a grainy photograph of 2 nurses in white caps standing next to a table piled with folded fabric. "Volunteers needed," the caption pleads. You've already been volunteering, of course. Knitting masks, washing bandages, boiling water in case anyone in the neighborhood gets too sick to move. But there's a new call now. The Red Cross wants to formalize the efforts, and you, despite knowing full well your medical skills are limited to boiling tea, decide to answer. The makeshift Red Cross station is set up in the basement of the local church. It smells like wax and disinfectant and prayer. Someone's dragged pews into a circle, and volunteers sit with baskets of fabric scraps, scissors, spools of thread, and sewing machines that chug like miniature trains. It's not glamorous. It's not sanitary by modern standards, but it is buzzing with energy, the kind born from people trying very hard not to feel helpless. The Red Cross supervisor is a woman named Mrs. Marigold, a name so soothing it feels fictional. She wears a navy armband with the Red Cross stuck against it, and she speaks with the clipped authority of someone who has personally organized both disaster relief and chaotic church potlucks. We're focusing on gauze masks today, she tells the room. 3 layers pleated, one size fits most, stitch tight, trim loose threads. Don't sneeze on the pile. You take a seat at a table with 4 others. There's a teenage boy with ink-stained fingers who says he's a typesetter by trade, but his shop closed last week. Next to him, a woman who smells faintly of lavender and says nothing except pass the scissors every few minutes. Across from you, an elderly man with trembling hands folds gauze into squares while humming a tune you don't recognize. You fall into rhythm, cutting, folding, stitching. The mechanical repetition is oddly calming, like kneading bread or brushing your hair. Outside the church, the world is still unraveling, but in here, you're making something. Small, tangible, mask by mask. Someone brings in a tray of tea, and you take a moment to sip from a chipped porcelain cup. Conversation begins to bloom again tentatively. Someone tells a story about a man who refused to wear his mask and got hit with a broom by an angry shopkeeper. Another jokes about fashioning a mask from old corset boning for extra structure. It's funny because it's real, just surreal enough to be true. People are improvising protection however they can. Silk handkerchiefs, coffee filters, pages torn from cookbooks. One man even tried lining his with eucalyptus leaves, convinced the aroma would keep the sickness out. Historians still argue whether such homemade attempts made any measurable difference. Some say they were placebo barriers, psychological masks rather than physical ones, but others believe they helped in quiet ways, by slowing the spread just enough for someone down the line to survive. And besides, in an age before N95s, hope and thread were all most people had. At one point, the door bursts open and a young woman stumbles in, clutching a stack of packages. "From the train station," she gasps. "A fresh delivery, elastic bands." A cheer rises, almost comically loud for a room full of mask makers. Elastic is a hot commodity now. Most masks have relied on string ties or even buttons, but elastic means comfort, speed, adjustability. You feel like you've just received a magic ingredient. You're assigned to elastic duty, cutting it into lengths, anchoring it to the corners of masks, testing the stretch. Your fingers grow sore, but there's a strange thrill in efficiency. For once, you are beating the flu, one elastic loop at a time. Mrs. Marigold passes by and nods at your stack. "Fine work," she says. "We'll have these shipped to the hospital by sundown." The word hospital makes your stomach twist. You haven't dared go near it. The stories are too grim. Patients crammed 2 to a bed. Hallways lined with stretchers. Nurses fainting from exhaustion. And of course the smells. You've heard of the smells. And yet, a tiny part of you wonders, would it be worse not to help? You're already here. You're already stitching. At the far end of the room, the teenage typesetter tells a joke about printing errors and flu warnings. One sign said, "Beware the 1918 flute." You laugh, more out of obligation than amusement. The woman next to him chuckles too, then sneezes into her elbow. The room goes momentarily still. She waves a hand. "Just dust," she says, but her eyes dart downward. "You all go back to work, a little quieter now." As evening falls, you tie off your last stitch and place the finished mask in the pile. It's your 34th of the day. The stack beside you looks like a tiny city of cloth roofs. Mrs. Marigold rings a handbell, an old signal from church days, and everyone begins to pack up. As you leave, she hands you a bundle of scraps. "In case you want to make more at home," she says. "We need them everywhere." You walk home in the dusky light, fingers still tingling from the needlework. A dog barks in the distance. A couple crosses the street to avoid you, both masked and moving quickly. The air is sharp and smells faintly of wood smoke and bleach. Back in your kitchen, you lay the scraps out carefully. You'll finish a few more tonight, maybe even try a new design. Because these masks, flimsy though they may be, are more than fabric. They are stitched prayers, loops of courage, threads of solidarity passed hand to hand, house to house. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do in a pandemic is sit down and sew. You stay up late that night, fingers tracing the soft edges of mask scraps spread across your kitchen table. There's something oddly peaceful about this midnight sewing. No Red Cross bell, no nervous laughter, no pointed sneezes to freeze the room. Just you, a needle, and the distant tick of the mantel clock. As the candle gutters low, you start to feel like part of a secret society, the mask makers of the night, somewhere across town, or even across the country. Someone else is probably hunched over their own table, stitching gauze like you are, squinting in half-light. It's not glamorous work, but it feels essential. The next morning, you're sore but determined. You wrap your bundle of new masks in brown paper, tie it off with twine, and drop it at the church steps before most people are even awake. There's no applause, no record of your name, just a growing pile of quiet help waiting to be sorted, sanitized, and sent out. On your way home, you pass two boys using the empty street as a baseball field. Their masks hang around their necks like ascots, and they're arguing over whether a parked wagon counts as a home run boundary. You smile, then flinch a little as one of them coughs. They don't notice. They just keep playing. By midday, your neighbor, Mrs. Dotson, taps gently at your door. She's in her 60s, with a crown of iron-gray curls and a voice like melted caramel. She's holding a bundle of yarn and 2 sets of knitting needles. "You knit?" she asks, as though you haven't been running a mask factory out of your living room. You nod. She smiles. "Come by my porch later," she says. "I've got a new pattern." That evening, you join her on a creaky front stoop. Her cat, Barnaby, watches suspiciously from a windowsill. She hands you a sheet of folded paper, the official pattern for the Red Cross knitted face mask. Yes, knitted. Gauze wasn't the only material in play back then. With the demand outpacing supply and a nation of idle hands at home, the Red Cross began encouraging the public to knit masks using thick cotton yarn. They weren't airtight, sure, but they were washable, reusable, and easy for people to make by the dozen. The pattern is simple, a ribbed rectangle, about 6 inches wide and 4 tall, with knitted ties at each corner, kind of like a sleep mask's rugged cousin. You cast on the first row and fall into rhythm. Click, click, yarn over, pull through, repeat. As you knit, Mrs. Dodson fills the silence with stories from her childhood, how her mother used to knit lace so fine it could fit through a wedding ring, how she once used a hairpin as a makeshift crochet hook during a train delay. It's oddly comforting, like living inside a history book's footnotes. At one point, she pauses and frowns at her yarn. You know, she murmurs, historians still argue whether these knitted masks did anything at all. She shrugs, but I figure better to do something than nothing. You nod. It's become something of a mantra. In fact, debates about mask efficacy were everywhere during the pandemic. Scientific journals published dueling reports. Some cities, like San Francisco, made masks legally required. Others issued polite suggestions. There was no standardized production, no CDC, no surgical grade certification. Some masks were made of cheesecloth, others from flour sacks. There were even ads for velvet-lined fashion masks with built-in perfume sachets, promising protection and elegance. In Denver, a doctor claimed that onion poultices worn under the chin could prevent illness. In New York, a society lady wore a mask made of lace, dyed to match her gloves. And in Chicago, entire knitting circles formed with the sole purpose of producing thousands of these yarn-based face coverings. You and Mrs. Dodson are latecomers to that movement, but you knit with the same quiet purpose. A few rows in, she offers you a thermos of weak tea, and you both sip in silence, rocking gently in your chairs. Barnaby watches, disapproving as always. The knitting continues long after the sun dips behind the trees. You hear distant laughter, maybe a family playing charades indoors. The town is quieter now, fewer wagons, no train whistles. Even the dogs seem subdued. After 2 hours, you hold up your finished mask. It's lumpy, a little misshapen. One tie is longer than the other, but it's there, real, soft, protective in its own awkward way. Mrs. Dodson smiles. That'll do, she says, in the same tone someone might use to describe a lopsided cake. Over the next few days, you return to her porch regularly. You bring new yarn colors, sunflower yellow, dusty plum, stormy gray, and exchange notes on tension, cast-ons, and ear loop techniques. She shows you how to weave a tighter rib for a snugger fit. You teach her how to add a little embroidered star to the corner of each finished piece, just for flair. It's not a factory, it's not fast, but it is strangely joyful, and in a world full of grim headlines, that counts for something. At one point, a reporter stops by. Word's gotten out that the knitting club on Maple Street is churning out handmade masks faster than the local Red Cross depot. He's young, polite, and clearly just doing his job. Snaps a few photographs, asks you to pose with your needles mid-stitch. You do, but not without rolling your eyes a little. Try to get my good side, Miss Dodson jokes, then she cackles so hard her stitches unravel. A few days later, your photo is in the paper. Neighborhood heroes, the porch mask makers. You nearly choke on your coffee when you see it, but you clip the article and stick it on the fridge. Because honestly, why not? Of course, not everyone's on board. A neighbor scoffs and calls your masks yarn fads. A man in line at the grocer mutters something about knitting propaganda. One woman even mails back a returned mask with a note. Too scratchy. Would rather take my chances. You try not to take it personally. You just go back to your needles. Because here's the thing. These knitted masks, however itchy or imperfect, represent a very human instinct. When the world spins out of control, we reach for the tangible, for the things we can shape with our own hands. Masks, meals, music, small kindnesses wrapped in yarn. As you finish another row, Mrs. Dodson pats your wrist and says, "You've got the hang of it now." You don't answer. You're too busy planning your next star-shaped embroidery. The dawn breaks over your quiet street, and with it, a new kind of rhythm settles into your days. You start noticing how the pandemic has rewired everyday life like a slow, invisible clock ticking beneath the surface. It's not just masks and knitting anymore. There's a whole new vocabulary unfolding around you, like whispered codes between neighbors, trying to make sense of this strange new world. The word quarantine is everywhere now. You hear it on the radio, see it in the newspaper headlines, and even in casual conversations at the market. But the quarantine of 1918 wasn't a uniform experience. Cities and towns had different rules, some strict, others lax. And this patchwork approach shaped how communities survived or stumbled. You find yourself wondering, what exactly did quarantine look like back then? No apps tracking your location, no Zoom calls to keep you company, just wooden signs nailed to doors, police patrols enforcing curfews, and the steady drone of handbills dropped in the street urging, "Stay home." One morning, you pass by an old pharmacy where the pharmacist wears a mask so thick it nearly muffles his voice. Inside, the shelves are sparsely stocked. Cough syrups, antiseptics, and a strange mix of patent medicines promising everything from stronger lungs to a virus-proof constitution. You peek closer and spot a jar labeled Golden Seal Tonic, rumored to be a cure-all among hopeful customers. Historians still argue whether such remedies offered any real benefit or were simply placebos wrapped in fancy glass. Out on the sidewalks, you notice how the social dance has shifted. People avoid handshakes, and the customary cheek kiss is replaced by a polite nod or an awkward wave. Kids play in smaller groups, and the usual street chatter feels muted, as if everyone is holding their breath along with the city. This is a time when public health posters become the town's unspoken poetry. One plastered on a brick wall depicts a stern nurse pointing to a list of symptoms: fever, chills, exhaustion. Another, bright and colorful, shows a cheerful family practicing good hygiene, washing hands, covering coughs. The artwork is earnest, almost quaint, but it carries a heavy weight. You overhear a conversation between two women outside the bakery. One mentions Spanish flu, a nickname whose origin remains debated among scholars. Some say it was called that simply because Spain's uncensored press was the first to report it widely, while others argue the name unfairly stigmatized the country. Either way, the moniker sticks, even as the disease silently leaps from continent to continent. On your way back, you stop at the local library and pick up a dusty journal from 1918. The entries are raw and honest. The streets are empty today, one reads, and the hospitals are overflowing. Another mentions how schools closed abruptly, leaving children to wander empty playgrounds or sit quietly at home. You imagine those children, their small hands tracing the wooden frames of windows, faces pressed against glass, wondering when they'll see their friends again. The silence of their classrooms must have felt like a ghost story without an ending. By late afternoon, you notice a small group gathered in front of City Hall, wearing masks that vary from simple cloth wraps to more elaborate designs with metal nose clips and stitched pleats. A city official speaks softly about new guidelines: no public gatherings over 10 people, mandatory masks on public transport, and an appeal to citizens' sense of duty to protect one another. And yet, despite all this, life presses on. Street vendors sell homemade remedies. Neighbors share rationed food. Church bells toll for those lost. The city's pulse continues, slower but persistent, like a heartbeat muffled beneath layers of cotton and wool. You pause to reflect on the curious paradox of quarantine, enforced isolation that paradoxically breeds new forms of connection. People send letters, drop off food for the sick, and knit masks on front porches. The sense of shared sacrifice is palpable, even if the toll is unseen. At night, you think about how this patchwork quarantine shaped communities differently, how some emerged resilient, while others were scarred. Historians still argue whether earlier and stricter quarantine measures would have saved more lives or simply prolonged the agony. As you lay your head down, the soft hum of the fan blends with the memory of bustling streets now hushed, and you find yourself slowly drifting, carried by the invisible threads of a city holding its breath. You wake to a different kind of quiet, the kind that creeps into the bones of a city gripped by a pandemic. The newspapers have changed tone, less about battles overseas, more about the battle within, the battle against a microscopic enemy that nobody can see but everyone fears. Across the country, hospitals are bursting at the seams, their wards filled with patients coughing into cloths and clutching handkerchiefs soaked with fever sweat. Nurses and doctors, often exhausted and underprepared, work around the clock. You hear whispers of makeshift morgues in city parks, of families who can't even say goodbye to loved ones. But here's a peculiar twist in the tale. The public's view of medical workers shifts dramatically. In many places, nurses and doctors are celebrated as heroes. There are parades, banners, and songs praising their tireless work, yet not everyone welcomes them with open arms. In some towns, fear turns into suspicion. Medical staff are asked to live separately, or even shunned by their communities, an eerie echo of later pandemics. You find yourself intrigued by the role of women during this crisis. With many men away fighting in World War I, women stepped into new roles, working as nurses, factory workers, and even in public health administration. Some formed volunteer groups to distribute masks, deliver food, and comfort the sick. Their efforts were often unsung, yet essential. On a dusty street corner, you encounter a woman sitting at a small table covered in sewing supplies. She tells you about the mask committees forming across the country, groups of women pooling their skills to produce thousands of face coverings for their communities. Some even crafted masks with decorative embroidery, adding a touch of dignity to the otherwise grim task. These women were pioneers of public health activism long before the term existed. Historians still debate how much their grassroots efforts truly impacted the spread of the flu, but there's no question they helped ease fear and isolation by knitting tangible expressions of care. You also learn about the social rituals that adapted in response to the flu. Weddings were postponed, funerals held with only immediate family, and public dances cancelled indefinitely. Yet, people found subtle ways to connect, exchanging letters, sending flowers from afar, and even leaving food on neighbors' porches. Amid all this, some towns experimented with more creative public health measures. In San Francisco, a mask parade was organized to encourage compliance, complete with marching bands and floats. Elsewhere, police officers handed out pamphlets and even held lectures on the importance of hygiene and mask wearing. You can't help but chuckle imagining a band playing Tiptoe Through the Tulips while handing out face masks, because even in the darkest times, people crave a bit of light-heartedness. By late afternoon, you visit a pharmacy window displaying a new invention, the face shield. Unlike the cloth mask sewn by knitting circles, these shields were made of celluloid, a transparent material that covered the entire face. They offered a novel layer of protection but were cumbersome and expensive, limiting widespread use. You consider the irony. The public's eager embrace of a simple cloth mask crafted by neighbors versus the more sophisticated but less accessible shield. Sometimes the easiest solutions are the ones that truly stick. As dusk falls, you reflect on the enduring images of the 1918 pandemic, the brave nurses, the busy mask makers, the cautious townspeople adapting their lives. It's a tapestry woven with fear, hope, and quiet resilience. You settle under your blankets, the soft rustle of sheets mingling with distant night sounds, and feel a deep connection to those who lived through that strange and difficult time. The days drag on with a strange mix of routine and uncertainty. You notice how the rhythm of life shifts around invisible checkpoints, the rising and falling number of cases, the arrival of new health orders, and the constant presence of those knitted masks on faces you once recognized clearly. One curious custom emerges that you wouldn't expect in a pandemic. Mask knitting clubs become a social lifeline. These groups gather, sometimes outdoors, sometimes in well-ventilated community halls, to share patterns, exchange yarn, and swap stories about their experiences with the flu. You imagine the scene: soft clacking of needles, quiet laughter, and the comforting scent of wool blending with faint traces of antiseptic from nearby hand-washing stations. There's an unexpected warmth here, a small rebellion against isolation. The act of knitting masks becomes a gentle rhythm to soothe anxious minds and tired hands. Mask knitting is more than just a practical act. It becomes a symbol of care and solidarity. Some clubs design unique patterns to distinguish neighborhoods or even professions. A particular set of stitches might signify a teacher, a baker, or a nurse, each mask telling a subtle story of the wearer's place in the community. You learn that these clubs often relied on donated yarn from local mills, sometimes repurposing old wool sweaters. The process was painstaking, but it connected people across social divides. Historians still argue whether these grassroots efforts had measurable impact on transmission rates, but their emotional and cultural significance is undeniable. The mask knitting phenomenon also inspired some light-hearted creativity. One club even organized a mask fashion show, where participants displayed masks decorated with lace, beads, and embroidered initials. It's a quiet celebration of normalcy amid upheaval. At the same time, You discover some unexpected challenges. The scarcity of materials meant not everyone could participate, and some poorer communities struggled to access sufficient supplies. This created a patchwork of mask availability that mirrored broader inequalities in the pandemic's impact. You stroll past a town square where a group of children, faces hidden behind oversized masks, play a game of hopscotch. Their laughter is muffled but persistent, a hopeful reminder that life presses forward, even with cotton and wool between breaths. Meanwhile, debates swirl about the effectiveness of masks. Some public officials demand strict mask mandates, while others doubt their value. The public is caught in a swirl of conflicting advice, much like today's pandemics. You think how history sometimes seems to repeat itself, wrapped in layers of cotton and misunderstanding. In the quiet of your room, you pull a soft blanket up to your chin, fingers tracing imaginary stitches. The thought of those knitters, quietly weaving protection and comfort stitch by stitch, feels strangely soothing, and as sleep begins to pull you under, you carry with you the image of a world wrapped in handmade masks, linked by shared hope and quiet resilience. The pandemic's relentless march continues to reshape daily life, and you notice how even the most mundane routines now bear the imprint of fear and adaptation. Streets once bustling with chatter and footsteps have softened into quiet lanes where people pass each other with careful distance, their faces obscured by layers of fabric. One of the lesser-known effects of the flu is the impact on postal services. You imagine the postman, mask-covered and wary, delivering letters that feel more precious than ever. With gatherings curtailed and travel restricted, letters become lifelines. You hold in your hand a letter dated 1918, penned by a soldier stationed abroad who writes about the flu raging both on the front lines and back home. The letter is full of longing and strange hope. We are as much at war with this invisible foe as we are with the armies over the hills, it reads. It's a reminder that this pandemic was intertwined with the brutal backdrop of World War I, compounding the anxieties of a world already on edge. You also learn about the fascinating ways people tried to protect themselves in public spaces. Public transportation, for example, became a focus of concern. Streetcars and buses were disinfected regularly, though the methods were rudimentary by today's standards. Some cities introduced mask patrols to ensure compliance, creating an odd mix of civic duty and social policing. At the same time, you discover how the pandemic forced innovation in healthcare. Temporary hospitals were set up in schools, community centers, and even tents in parks. Volunteer nurses, some just teenagers, learned on the job and worked alongside seasoned doctors. Their stories remind you that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet endurance of those who keep showing up. Meanwhile, a more peculiar detail catches your attention. Some patients were prescribed rest cures involving exposure to fresh air, open-air therapy, even when outdoors was the very place where the virus thrived. Hospitals constructed open-air wards, believing sunlight and wind would heal what medicine could not. Historians still debate the actual efficacy of these wards, but you imagine the eerie scenes of patients wrapped in blankets, lying outdoors under canvas awnings, the sun casting long shadows as nurses check on them. On a lighter note, you come across stories of humor and resilience. A newspaper cartoon shows a man trying to kiss a woman's masked face, only to be met with a muffled nope. Elsewhere, satirical poems and songs poked fun at the awkward new social customs, offering a gentle reminder that laughter is a balm even in bleak times. As night settles, you picture the world behind those masks, faces tired but determined, eyes bright with cautious hope. The pandemic's quiet grip on life may feel heavy, but it's also a story of adaptation, community, and the small acts of kindness that stitch society back together. You settle deeper into your pillow, the soft hum of the night your companion as your thoughts drift gently toward rest. The flu's shadow stretches beyond hospitals and homes, touching the very fabric of daily life and social rituals in ways you might not expect. You find yourself wandering the quieter streets of a town, trying to balance caution with the desire for normalcy. The pandemic nudges people to rethink public gatherings and even celebrations. Weddings, for example, transform dramatically. Large ceremonies are out of the question, replaced by intimate affairs with only a handful of attendees. You imagine a bride and groom, faces obscured by handmade masks, exchanging vows in a small parlor rather than a grand church. It's a strange mix of joy and melancholy, like a candle flickering softly against the dark. Schools close their doors, and children are sent home to continue their lessons under the watchful eyes of parents suddenly thrust into the role of teachers. In wealthier homes, private tutors step in. In others, lessons are delivered through letters or newspapers. The quiet absence of children's laughter in playgrounds is a poignant marker of the times. Yet, the human spirit seeks connection. You hear about window visits, where families communicate through open windows or over balconies to keep social bonds alive while staying safe. In some cities, musicians perform on street corners, their melodies drifting through the masked crowd like gentle reminders that life endures. Meanwhile, public health officials push campaigns promoting hand washing, fresh air, and of course, mask wearing. Posters with soft pastel colors and gentle slogans encourage compliance without alarmism. One reads, "A mask today keeps the flu away," accompanied by a kindly cartoon nurse holding a bouquet of masks. Despite the public's efforts, the flu's toll continues to rise. You come across heartbreaking stories of families separated by illness, loved ones lost in isolation, and communities rallying around grief. It's a reminder that even the gentlest history can carry a weight of sorrow. Historians still argue about the extent to which public health measures slowed the pandemic's spread. Some cities fared better than others, and timing mattered, a lesson not lost on later generations. On a brighter note, the pandemic spurred remarkable innovations in medicine and public health infrastructure. For example, you learn about advances in vaccine development, even if the 1918 flu vaccine was rudimentary compared to modern standards. The epidemic also accelerated the establishment of permanent public health organizations, sowing seeds for future preparedness. As you nestle beneath your covers, the day's images, a quiet wedding, children at home, masked musicians, fade softly into the night. The world keeps turning, one careful breath at a time. You awake to a world slowly grappling with the aftermath of the pandemic's deadliest wave. Streets are still quiet, but there's a tentative hope in the air, Like the soft stir of leaves in an early morning breeze, people begin emerging from their homes with cautious smiles beneath their masks, eager to reclaim some semblance of normal life. You're drawn to the story of those mask knitting clubs from before. Their work continues, though the urgency has waned. Some clubs evolve into community groups focused on general health education, while others quietly dissolve as life returns to a new normal. One fascinating detail you uncover is how some knitters incorporated coded messages into their patterns, a secret language woven into stitches, expressing hope, grief, or solidarity. These subtle signals created a hidden tapestry of community resilience, a silent conversation across towns and cities. Meanwhile, you see how the pandemic challenged social norms and gender roles. Women, having stepped into essential roles during the crisis, began to question their place in society more openly. Some historians argue the 1918 flu helped accelerate women's suffrage movements, while others suggest the link is more complex. Public spaces reopen with new rules. Theaters, restaurants, and churches gradually welcome patrons back, often with spacing measures and limited capacities. Yet a lingering wariness remains, and many prefer smaller, more personal gatherings. You also explore the cultural impacts on art and literature. The pandemic left an imprint on poetry, music, and visual arts, often themes of loss, resilience, and renewal. One poet describes the flu as a silent guest at every table, haunting yet strangely unspoken. Interestingly, the pandemic's effect on the economy varied widely. Some industries boomed, like mask production and public health supply, while others, such as travel and entertainment, struggled. Unemployment and poverty rose, deepening social divides. Yet amid these challenges, communities showed remarkable creativity. You hear about flu gardens, public spaces planted with medicinal herbs believed to boost immunity. These gardens were tended by volunteers and became small sanctuaries of calm. As night falls, you imagine a quiet street lit by gas lamps, the gentle murmur of voices filtered through the night air. It's a world cautiously healing, stitched together by the memory of masks and the steady heartbeat of human endurance. You settle under your blankets, feeling the weight of history lighten with each breath. As the pandemic slowly recedes, you find yourself drawn to the stories of children growing up in this altered world. The flu reshaped childhood in subtle and profound ways. Playgrounds emptied, schools closed, and the carefree laughter of youth was muffled behind masks and caution. One surprising detail emerges. Children's toys and games were adapted to fit new health guidelines. Traditional group games gave way to solo or distance play, and new toys that could be easily cleaned gained popularity. You imagine a child clutching a wooden toy soldier, careful not to share it with friends, their small hands both curious and cautious. Parents faced difficult choices, balancing protection with the need for socialization. Some children experienced extended isolation, which historians still debate as having complex effects on development and mental health. Families developed new rituals like story hours through windows or letter-writing circles to keep young minds engaged. You also explore the role of education. With schools shuttered, some teachers embraced inventive approaches, using radio broadcasts or printed lesson packets. Yet the digital divide was unimaginable at the time, making equal access impossible. The pandemic exposed and deepened educational inequalities that echoed for years. The flu's impact extended to food and nutrition. With supply chains disrupted, home gardens gained importance, and families turned to preserving food through canning and drying. Local markets adapted, prioritizing fresh produce over imported goods. You stumble upon the curious case of flu cakes, recipes designed to be nutritious yet easy to digest, incorporating ingredients believed to boost immunity like ginger and honey. These cakes became a comforting staple in many households, shared quietly like edible hugs. Amid these adjustments, children found moments of joy. You picture a small group playing hopscotch in a sunlit alley, their feet carefully spaced, laughter muffled but infectious. The resilience of youth offers a gentle counterpoint to the era's somber tone. Meanwhile, public health campaigns targeted families with advice on hygiene and nutrition, often featuring gentle illustrations designed to soothe rather than alarm. Posters showed smiling children washing hands or eating wholesome meals, a tender reminder that care could be both firm and kind. As you settle deeper into the calm night, these images of children navigating a changed world drift softly through your mind, quiet, hopeful, and full of possibility. The pandemic's effect on work and labor unfolds before you, like a slowly turning page in a worn book. Factories, offices, and farms all felt the tremors of illness and disruption, forcing people to adapt their routines and expectations. You picture workers donning masks, stepping cautiously into spaces once filled with bustling crowds and noise. One fascinating story emerges from the industrial cities, where mask production became a small but vital economy. Knitting clubs weren't the only places crafting protective gear. Factories repurposed their machinery to churn out masks and gowns. You imagine the clatter of looms and sewing machines, a steady rhythm of creation that kept communities connected to a purpose. In agriculture, labor shortages meant crops risked being left to wither. Some farms experimented with mechanization, hastening a shift that historians still argue was accelerated by the pandemic. The push towards machines changed not just harvests, but the very nature of rural life. The workplace itself transformed in subtle ways. Social distancing was unheard of before 1918, but now workers kept careful spacing, and shared tools were sanitized between uses. Offices installed windows that could open wide to bring in fresh air, a practice that slowly caught on beyond the pandemic years. Interestingly, women stepped into many roles traditionally held by men, whose numbers had been thinned by the war and illness. This shift challenged pre-existing gender norms, opening conversations that echoed through the coming decades. Some argue the pandemic was a catalyst for expanding women's participation in the workforce, though opinions vary. You also come across stories of mask fatigue, where workers struggle to maintain strict mask-wearing policies, especially in hot factories or fields. Humor often helped. Cartoons depicted workers fanning themselves behind masks or sneaking a quick breath of fresh air when no one was looking. Despite challenges, these changes laid groundwork for future workplace health standards. Employers began to see that protecting workers' health wasn't just kindness, it was essential for productivity. As you drift deeper into rest, you picture the steady hum of machinery, the rhythmic pulse of factories, and the quiet determination of workers sowing, harvesting, and typing their way through uncertain days. The pandemic's imprint on transportation and travel quietly reshapes the way people move from place to place. You imagine train stations, once lively hubs of chatter and clatter, now subdued, the usual crowds replaced by cautious travelers wrapped in masks and hesitant greetings. Railways implement new cleaning protocols. Ticket booths install glass barriers, and conductors wear masks to protect themselves and passengers. Some routes are suspended, while others operate at reduced capacity. The once celebrated thrill of travel now carries a shadow of risk and restraint. You find yourself intrigued by a curious case. Flu quarantine trains used to isolate suspected cases during long journeys. These trains had separate compartments where infected passengers were kept apart from others. It's a strange image, a moving fortress of containment winding through the countryside. Meanwhile, ocean liners, the pride of international travel, come under intense scrutiny. Ports impose strict quarantine rules, sometimes holding entire ships in limbo for weeks. You picture passengers pacing the decks, masked and restless, as the ship drifts in foggy harbors. Even bicycles see a surge in popularity. With public transport deemed risky, many turn to solo, outdoor travel. Bike shops report increased demand for repairs and new models, as people seek safe ways to move while avoiding crowds. Historians still debate the extent to which travel restrictions slowed the pandemic, but it's clear they reshaped attitudes toward mobility and public health. Travel, once a carefree adventure, now demands careful planning and new rituals of cleanliness. On a lighter note, you come across anecdotes of travelers trying to outwit mask regulations. One story involves a man who fashioned a mask out of a fishnet stocking, much to the confusion of onlookers. These little acts of rebellion, though minor, add a touch of humanity to the otherwise grave circumstances. As evening falls, you picture a train winding through misty hills, passengers silent and thoughtful behind their masks. The world is moving again, but with a newfound respect for the invisible currents that carry both people and disease. You close your eyes and breathe slowly, the steady rhythm of wheels on rails, a gentle lullaby guiding you towards sleep. The pandemic's reach extends even into leisure and entertainment, reshaping how people find comfort and distraction amid uncertainty. You imagine theaters, dance halls, and concert venues, once bursting with life, now shuttered or operating under strict limits, their silence speaking volumes. Yet creativity blooms in unexpected ways. Traveling entertainers adapt by performing outdoors, on rooftops, or even from windowsills, their voices and instruments carrying softly across quiet neighborhoods. You picture a violinist playing a melancholy tune while masked listeners stand scattered on sidewalks, clapping gently at a safe distance. One particularly charming detail involves the rise of flu-themed songs and parodies. These tunes mix humor and caution, helping people cope through laughter. You can almost hear a catchy chorus about mask knitting or hand washing, set to a jaunty folk melody. Public dances and balls are postponed indefinitely, but small family gatherings feature new traditions. Parlor games evolve to accommodate distance. Imagine charades played with exaggerated gestures from opposite corners of a room, or whispered riddles passed along in a game of telephone. Interestingly, silent films experience a boost. Without dialogue, they provide an escape accessible even to those who couldn't read well or preferred quieter entertainment. Movie theaters install fresh air systems and limit ticket sales, and the flicker of film reels becomes a shared, cautious pleasure. Historians still debate how much the pandemic influenced the rise of new entertainment forms like radio, which would soon revolutionize leisure. It's clear, though, that people's desire for connection and amusement persisted, even if the methods changed. Meanwhile, board games and puzzles see a renaissance as families seek calm indoor activities. You find accounts of game manufacturers running out of stock, with popular titles like chess and checkers becoming staples in pandemic households. As you nestle under your blanket, the echoes of distant laughter and soft melodies fill the night air in your mind, a gentle reminder that even in times of trial, joy finds a way. You feel the comforting rhythm of human resilience, slowly easing you toward rest. You turn your attention now to the medical community, the doctors, nurses, and caregivers who stood on the front lines of the 1918 flu pandemic. The hospitals, already stretched thin by the Great War, were suddenly overwhelmed by a wave of patients coughing, feverish and weak. You can almost hear the low murmur of worried voices and the shuffle of weary feet in sterile hallways. Doctors struggled with a virus they barely understood. Treatments were mostly supportive: rest, hydration, and the occasional experimental remedy. Some hospitals used oxygen tents, which seemed like something out of a science fiction novel. Patients resting under clear domes, breathing in the faint hope of clean air. A quirky but poignant fact emerges. Some nurses wore pins fashioned from small knitted masks, a symbol of solidarity with the mask knitting clubs. These pins became tiny talismans of protection and care, carried with pride even when the masks themselves were uncomfortable. You also learn about the toll the pandemic took on medical staff. Exhaustion, grief, and fear weighed heavily, yet many persevered with quiet determination. Some hospitals implemented rotating shifts to prevent burnout, a practice historians still argue about regarding its effectiveness during this crisis. Public health messaging became crucial, and doctors turned to newspapers, radio, and public posters to educate the masses on hygiene and prevention. The iconic image of the masked nurse was both reassuring and eerie, a new face of medical care in a frightening time. Interestingly, alternative medicine found renewed interest. Home remedies, herbal teas, and even spiritual healing coexisted alongside modern medicine, reflecting people's desperate search for any comfort or cure. Some doctors themselves recommended gentle herbal infusions to soothe symptoms. Despite the hardships, the medical response to the flu laid groundwork for future public health advances. You imagine a young nurse, hands steady despite fatigue, learning lessons that would shape healthcare for decades. As your eyelids grow heavier, the quiet strength of these caregivers lingers in your thoughts, a reminder of compassion quietly fighting invisible enemies in the dimly lit wards. You find yourself wandering through the evolving landscape of public health policies born out of the pandemic's wake. Cities, towns, and even small villages began enacting new rules aimed at preventing future outbreaks, many of which you might find surprisingly familiar. Mask mandates lingered long after the worst waves subsided. Some places made wearing masks in public a routine part of daily life, with enforcement varying from gentle reminders to formal fines. You can almost hear the quiet grumbles of those weary of masks, alongside others who felt safer wrapped in fabric. Interestingly, some cities experimented with open-air schools and workplaces, inspired by the belief that fresh air could flush out disease. Classrooms were moved outdoors or renovated with large windows, an idea that historians still debate in terms of long-term effectiveness. You also come across the curious practice of health passports, early versions of documentation proving vaccination or lack of symptoms before travel or employment. These documents weren't standardized and sparked privacy concerns that sound eerily modern. Local governments increased funding for sanitation infrastructure. Sewers, clean water supply, and waste removal became priorities. Public parks and recreational spaces received attention too, seen as essential for community well-being and recovery. The pandemic reshaped social customs as well. Handshakes fell out of favor temporarily, replaced by nods or polite waves. You picture a small gathering where guests awkwardly adjust to this new etiquette, laughter breaking the initial tension. On the lighter side, you learn of mask fashion trends that emerged. People decorated their masks with embroidery or painted patterns, turning necessary protection into personal expression. The knitting clubs played a part here too, creating colorful designs to brighten gloomy days. Historians still argue whether these changes would have taken root without the pandemic's push, but it's clear that public health became a shared priority in a way it hadn't been before. As you breathe slowly, the image of a quiet street lined with open windows and masked neighbors fades gently into your restful thoughts. You now drift into the realm of cultural memory and how the 1918 flu shaped stories, art, and remembrance. The pandemic was a shadow cast over the world, but it also left behind a legacy in the ways people chose to remember, or sometimes forget it. You imagine poets and writers grappling with the scale of loss, capturing the quiet grief that filled homes and streets. Some works mourn the vanished loved ones, while others reflect on the strange, surreal experience of living through an invisible enemy. One quirky tidbit stands out. A few artists created mask portraits, paintings, and sketches that immortalized people wearing their protective gear. These images, both haunting and oddly comforting, reveal the new normal etched onto faces once bare. Interestingly, the flu was often overshadowed in public memory by World War I. Memorials and history books tended to emphasize the war's heroics, leaving the pandemic somewhat in the background, a fact historians still debate about regarding its cultural impact. Local communities develop rituals to honor those lost, from quiet cemetery gatherings to annual days of reflection. Some of these traditions have faded, while others subtly influence modern memorial practices. You also encounter early film footage and photographs documenting hospitals, mask making, and daily life during the pandemic. These visual records serve as windows into a past both distant and immediate, bridging the gap between your quiet room and a world forever changed. On a lighter note, folk stories and jokes about the Great Mask Epidemic circulated, helping people process the shared hardship with gentle humor and camaraderie. As your mind eases, you feel the soft pulse of history's heartbeat, the collective memory of millions carrying both sorrow and resilience into the quiet night. You rest now, cocooned in the peaceful hum of remembrance. As the pandemic's immediate threat begins to wane, you observe how society cautiously steps into a new era of recovery and reflection. The streets slowly regain their usual bustle, though marked by subtle changes: the lingering scent of disinfectants, the sight of empty chairs spaced apart. Economic revival is patchy, with some businesses flourishing while others struggle to regain footing. You picture small shopkeepers cleaning their counters with extra care, hoping for steady customers while mindful of past losses. A quirky fact you come across is the rise of pandemic souvenirs. Objects like commemorative postcards, buttons, and even novelty masks sold as keepsakes. These little artifacts became tangible reminders of a shared ordeal, blending memory with commerce. You learn that some communities held recovery festivals, modest gatherings celebrating survival and health, featuring music, food, and speeches. These events offered a chance to reconnect while cautiously respecting ongoing health concerns. Historians still debate whether the pandemic permanently altered social attitudes toward hygiene and community responsibility. What is clear, however, is that many individuals carried newfound awareness into their daily habits. Regular hand washing, for instance, became more ingrained. Meanwhile, scientific research accelerated. The hunt for effective vaccines and treatments gained urgency, laying groundwork for modern immunology. You can almost hear the excited discussions in laboratories, mixing hope with cautious patience. On a lighter note, jokes about never taking fresh air for granted again floated in cafes and homes, gentle humor smoothing the edges of collective trauma. As you sink deeper into comfort, you sense the tentative optimism of a world slowly healing, carrying lessons learned into the quiet promise of tomorrow. Now you settle into the final stretch of this long, winding journey through the 1918 flu pandemic's many layers, your mind carrying the soft weight of stories past and lives changed forever. You picture the world a few years later, cities recovering, families rebuilding, but never quite forgetting the strange rhythm of those flu days. The pandemic's shadow lingered in subtle ways. Public health infrastructure improved, vaccine research continued, and societies became more aware of how fragile human life could be. You imagine a community gathering in a small town square where an old woman recounts tales of mask knitting clubs and the cautious steps people took to protect one another. A quirky piece of history comes to mind. In some places, flu survivors developed what was called pandemic humor, a bittersweet wit about masks, sneezes, and the ever-elusive quest for clean air. This humor softened the memory and made it bearable. Historians still debate the full global impact of the flu, especially in under-documented regions, but it's widely accepted that the pandemic shaped modern approaches to disease and public health. As your thoughts drift, you imagine the slow, gentle closing of this chapter in human history, pages turning quietly, a soft whisper of the past mingling with your own steady breath. You feel the comforting presence of resilience, humanity's ongoing dance with nature's unseen forces. This story, like your own rest tonight, is part of a much larger, enduring rhythm. Now, as you sink deeper into calm, let the quiet pulse of history soothe your mind and carry you gently into sleep. Wind down, the night stretches long and soft around you, a gentle blanket wrapping the edges of your awareness. The stories you've heard, of masks knitted by candlelight, of silent trains, of weary nurses, fade into a warm glow, as if tucked into a quiet corner of a vast, ancient library. There's no hurry here, only the slow, steady breath of time moving forward. The past and present mingle, their edges blurred, inviting you to rest within this timeless space. Every fact, every tale you've carried tonight is a small thread woven into a vast tapestry, a reminder of the many ways humans face the unknown with courage, humor, and hope. Your eyelids grow heavy. The soft hum of the fan blends with your breath, the rhythm gentle and steady. You are safe, held by the quiet strength of those who came before and those who rest now. Let go of the day's worries. Sink into the deep calm that history's stories offer, a place where you can relax, drift, and eventually sleep, wrapped in the soothing embrace of time. Good night and sweet dreams.